you've not only been successful, like going from like the rags to riches, or I guess riches to rags to riches, but doing it in a really competitive environment, surviving over that time, and not just surviving, but thriving, and then doing it in multiple markets. So, when you went from like your just individual market to finally, jumping the border to a different market, like how did you approach that?
Well, I mean, initially, California is a large state. So when we started expanding from our main markets, we were looking at, markets that are, 3 hours north or south, or 4 hours or 5 hours south of us. So in the same state. And that's kind of our first iteration into going into new markets was, within the same state. The second market I tackled was the Eugene, Springfield, Oregon area. And the reason I chose that market initially was because I had family up there. And so I wanted to get comfortable with our processes and our systems and still have some controls in place. The next state we ended up venturing out into, my dispo guy actually moved a few hours from the market we were looking at. And it just made sense to tackle that state, and that state's in the Midwest. And now we're in states that I don't have any control in. So, but initially, I did it a little more conservative than I would say some people would. I made sure I had some relationship in the market that I was going into to allow me to kind of establish systems and processes that I felt comfortable with. And now, like I said, I'm expanding into. I'm trying to go countrywide at this point in time. So we're setting up some marketing campaigns to start tapping markets all over the country.
Cool. So, I mean, really, relationships and boots on the ground, that has been a key theme with other guests. So you've had that, whether it was family, an acquisition agent that moved, or it was relatively within driving distance if you had to go there. But you also probably still had resources there, but you are now going into other places where you have much less resources. So let's talk about those. How are you approaching like going into, and I don't know what these markets are, but I'm like say Phoenix or I don't know, Chattanooga, Tennessee. You probably know people there, but you don't have any hard resources there. Like how are you approaching going into those markets?
Well, so one of the things that I've learned through the years is, people will talk about marketing and they'll talk about markets as if they're all the same. They all operate the same way, and they don't. There's a learning curve. There's things that make sense in California that buyers won't touch with a 10-foot pole in another state. So there's markets that are good for appreciation. There's markets that are good for cash flow. I'm sure you're relatively familiar with that. So, and you got to look at like what buyers are going to respond to if you're going to wholesale, what buyers are going to respond to if you're going to flip. So the first thing we look at is there any demand in a market? Before we even look at a market, is there any demand? And to tell you the truth, Chris, like we've lined ourselves up with institutional buyers, hedge funds, and different buyers that are fairly aggressive across the country. And so one of the things that I look at is, where are my institutional buyers at? If I'm going to go into a market, do I already have a buyer in place that I know their criteria, that they're going to be relatively well versed in explaining what their parameters are? Like, they're not going to buy houses older than this age. They're only going to buy in these zip codes. And if I have those buyers in that particular market, then I'm going to explore that market, because there's always this learning curve to like, what are sellers going to respond to? What are buyers going to respond to in that market? If I have a buyer that I know their fundamental buying criteria for a market, then I can enter that market and shorten that learning curve, if that makes sense. So we can get our feet in that market, start picking up property to start getting momentum when we start branching out to other buyers.